What's up, y'all? I got a dance deal for you, Chicago. Hubbard Street Dance heats up the Harris Theater stage with its spring series of Joy next week. Now, this is some of the most dynamic, cutting-edge contemporary dance made by the world's leading choreographers right here in Chicago. I'm excited for echoes of our ancestors by Maria Torres, among other creators. But you can only catch it for 3 performances between May 17th and May 19th. Luckily, CityCast Chicago listeners can get tickets in any section for 20% off using code CityCast online or over the phone. Visit hubbardstreetdance.com for details and use code CityCast. Today on CityCast Chicago, pro-Palestinian protests emerge at colleges and high schools across Chicago. Did the former candidate for governor collude with a super PAC, and an iconic blues bar is reopening in Greater Grand Crossing? To help me break it all down, I'm here with Crane Chicago Businesses' Lee John Greco and Block Club Chicago's Maxwell Evans. It's Friday, May 3rd. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. Lee, welcome back to CityCast Chicago. How you feeling today, my friend?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here again, Jacoby. Nice to see and hear from you again.
Hey, it is always good to see you and have you on the mic. And Maxwell, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm feeling beautiful with this weather, as I'm sure everybody is.
I am glad that it is finally getting a little bit better. I'm not gonna lie, those like 30-degree April days were starting to get to me a little bit. They were starting to get to me. If you are new to CityCast Chicago, every single Friday, we like to bring in friends, these amazing voices from across the city of Chicago, to find out what stories were they paying attention to this week. But before we jump into those top stories, I have to check in on the episode we did earlier this week, which was our official guide to May, where we give you some of the events we're looking forward to, some tips for surviving May. So I got to ask our guest today, what's something in May you are looking forward to? Lee, I want to start with you. What is on your May radar?
Yeah, so I know this is not technically Chicago-based, but I gotta give a shout out to my cousin Vanessa. She's getting married in 2 weeks.
Come on.
So that's back in Buffalo, so it'll be like a fun Buffalo wedding. Her husband's a big Bills fan, so I'm sure we're gonna play Shout at the wedding because, you know, you got to at a Buffalo wedding, right?
No, Bills Mafia travels well, whether they are just at the bar, at the game, or at somebody's wedding. I guarantee somebody will probably be in a jersey jumping through a table at some point.
Oh yeah, totally. I don't know that I'm going to do any table jumping at the wedding, but we'll see how it goes. I'm always worried if insurance covers that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And just like you guys said, the weather, I was on the lakefront yesterday. Weather was great. Also, I feel like I missed the memo. Everybody was like coupled up. I think as soon as it gets warm in Chicago, people just go feral, and it wasn't too much PDA. It was a nice amount of PDA. But I'm telling people not to let it get too out of hand, okay? Just enjoy the weather. There are kids around, all right?
Lee, you have been our singles correspondent before. I remember, I think last summer, 2 summers ago, we were talking about the Logan Square Horny Farmers Market. And Farmers Market season is during this month. It's picking back up. You going to be back out there at the Farmers Market?
I mean, listen, regardless of my status, whatever it is, I love the farmer's market. I like to get a nice bouquet. I like some cheese. I got my coffee, you know, like the farmer's market itself is a good place to go.
Branding aside, I'll still be there for the jam.
I'll be there.
Max, what about you? There's so much to look forward to in May. What is something that's on your calendar for sure?
Yeah, so I've got a couple. First off, I have to shout out my youngest brother because it's his birthday in May, and I always see, like, I can never keep straight what his actual birthday is, and I finally put it in my calendar, got the day down. I'm going to remember to tell him happy birthday on the actual day, so that's the first big one. And then a few days after his birthday, I've got Freddie Gibbs and Madlib are playing at the Assault Shed on May 19th. I mean, when they first came together, I mean, it's like 13, 14 years ago at this point, I think. Like, I've been a fan since day one, fan since Pinata dropped, especially. That's kind of when my fandom amped up. And so, I mean, I love Freddie Gibbs, one of my favorite rappers, but it's really Madlib, maybe my second, third favorite producer of all time. Getting to see him in person is just going to be like, yeah, I'm so pumped for that.
And I've gone to a few things at Salt Shed I enjoy it. I think the sound is really good. I think regardless of where you're standing on the floor, you get a pretty good view. If people want to know some of the things I'm looking forward to in May, things like taking my mom out for a Mother's Day brunch at Dawn AM Eatery, then please listen to our episode that dropped earlier this week. Are you self-conscious about your smile? Do you only allow yourself a closed mouth grin? Well, with Aligner experts, there's no reason for you to diminish your smile. As orthodontists, they have the privilege of witnessing the remarkable transformation of patients' smiles, which often translates into a profound boost in their confidence. Yet, there always seems to be a deterrent. I ain't got the time, I don't have the funds. Luckily, Aligner Experts is redefining convenient and accessible clear aligner solutions. With customizable treatments, transparent pricing, and their cutting-edge 3D scanners and dental monitoring technology, you can transform your smile through the convenience of your own schedule. Stop in at their West Loop or Lakeview clinic today for your complimentary smile assessment. Aligner Experts, your destination for advanced clear aligner solutions. P.S. They got another clinic on the way, so stay tuned for their Old Town location. As I said earlier, every week we like to bring in some folks to break down some big stories, as well as some underhyped stories from the week. And we have to start with pro-Palestinian protests emerging at colleges and high schools across Chicago. Let's be clear. There have been demonstrations at high schools and colleges already. There have been marches and rallies. But what we've seen this week in particular is unique, as it is sort of following in the footsteps of larger protests at universities at other parts of the country. Lee, I want to bring you in here as you have been following this week. Exactly what took place this week at some of the colleges in Chicago, whether it was UChicago or DePaul?
Yeah, so we're seeing, these protests really amp up. DePaul started encampments. You had over at Northwestern. That's kind of the most interesting case so far, I think, to follow. And my colleague, Brendan Dupre, has been doing all the work on this because he covers higher ed for us at Crain's. But it's been really fascinating watching what's happening at Northwestern compared to what's happening on our two other coasts, whether it's UCLA or, of course, as I'm sure everybody's been following what's happening at Columbia, the huge police presence there the other night. Northwestern, meanwhile, earlier this week, their president, Michael Schill, was getting a lot of praise for basically, brokering a peace agreement on the campus. And so, he gave in to some of the demands of the protesters. They are going to look into the school's investments a little more. But then we see later in the week that Midwest ADL, that's the Anti-Defamation League, is calling for Schill's removal. And then later on, 3 Jewish students filed suit over the encampment. So it's just interesting what's happening right now in this conversation around what's happening in Gaza, because you have these groups like Midwest ADL who are saying that what's happening in these encampments is anti-Semitic. And, in every major protest, there are going to be a few bad actors. But I think kind of the question here is, how are you defining anti-Semitic? And that's something that the ADL has been grappling with on a national scale, not just Midwest ADL. There was a very good story in The Guardian about this a couple weeks ago, looking at ADL's own ranks, who some of the people that work there were saying, hey, you can't just say that speaking out against the state of Israel is anti-Semitic. We should really stick to our original goal. But it's very murky. So I think we're kind of seeing that happen now on kind of a local level, and that's why President Schill seems to be getting a little more backlash after something that he was previously praised for. Because again, things seem relatively calm in Chicago so far. We're not seeing these big police clashes.
As a university professor myself, and the idea that they are sort of naive or they are somehow being riled up from the online woke mob, as conservative channels have tried to portray these protests, is ridiculous. People have been forced to live in tents, to live on the move, as their homes, as their neighborhoods have essentially been wiped out since this bombing campaign started nearly 6 months ago. So I have to say, for students to put themselves in the position where they're clashing, like we saw in Colombia, against a full militarized police force that is coming in with tear gas, and some spots they're coming in with rubber bullets, to sort of reframe that as these are just woke kids on a campus who've been riled up by the internet, seems disingenuous and disheartening. Max, I know you have written about this as well. How have you been following these protests this week?
Yeah, so I've been covering the U Chicago encampment, which started on Monday, and I was out there for a good chunk of the day on Monday. And I think what you were saying about the idea of students being naive with this is, that's in direct contrast to what I experienced out there. The example I kind of lean on is, as I was trying to report on this, I was going around talking to like one of the students that had been kind of vetted and talked to with the organizers beforehand. They put this person out as like a media contact, basically, like to field questions and things like that. And so afterwards, I went beyond them, tried to talk with other students on the encampment as well. And immediately as I did so, some other students came up to me and were like, "Hey, we're really not trying to have you do that. We want you to only talk to the people that have been vetted first." And so I had a really interesting back and forth with them where I was like, I understand that, I respect that, but I'm also here to do my job and like talk to as many different perspectives as I can and try to get beyond just the line that the main organizers are pushing. And so immediately after we had that conversation, they were very respectful, very understanding to me. And then they got on the megaphone and were like, "Do not talk to the press if you have not been cleared with us." And I think that shows me that this is not like a spur of the moment thing. This is not like we haven't thought about this, we're just acting irrationally type thing. Even though it made my job harder, even though I don't necessarily agree with that, and I think that I would really appreciate the chance to get a diverse view on what this encampment represents, I also think it shows that people are taking this very seriously. They don't want somebody that isn't affiliated with them. They don't want some random coming in and infiltrating their encampment to then be reflected in the media as, "Oh, this is representative of the students. Oh, this is representative of what we want." Again, like, I am the media. I am trying to do my job. It is frustrating to not be able to more effectively like reach out and get all the perspectives that I wanted. But I think the way that they handled it with me personally, the way that they showed me pure respect, no like confrontation, no like get off our encampment or anything like that, that sort of balance shows me that young people are really thinking of this. They're really putting time and effort into this. And frankly, I've seen the way that mainstream media has treated causes. I've seen the way that mainstream media will not necessarily do deep dives. And I can definitely empathize with that frustration. And it's just brought up a lot of issues that I think are necessary for myself as a reporter, myself as a person existing in this world to grapple with, and not kind of like, I don't know, summarize it as in like these are sides against each other, but yeah, try to understand how can we reflect the world that we live in properly.
And I like what you just said, Max, in terms of how movements have been portrayed, because I think we also have a revisionist history. We occupy such a small space and time in our own country's history, and we forget, because now you look at abolitionists and you say those are heroes. No, those were marked as traitors. You looked at anti-war protesters as, oh man, they were really standing up for something on university campuses. Yeah, they were called communists, right? The Occupy movement that tried to call out billionaires, they were called kooks, right? I understand, because like you all, I am someone who is trying to understand and trying to listen and trying to get interviewed, but I'm also someone who has just sort of lived in a space in which I understand now the media is a lot more complicated, a lot more diverse, that there are people like yourselves who are out here trying to understand stories thoroughly. I do think it's important that people understand, though, what are largely the demands being made, because what can get lost in this conversation of tactics and how we should go about protesting and when and where and what's appropriate and what goes against university policy, in you all's understanding, what are students asking their universities to do?
Yeah, so I know at University of Chicago, they've had a pretty clear outlining of divest, disclose, and repair. That's to divest from companies that are essentially that they view as profiting from the war. To disclose the university's ties to weapons manufacturers, and to repair in the form of reparations for not only Palestinians, but for Southsiders, as this has kind of been a moment to draw attention to the university's relationship with the Southside community that it inhabits. And so, yeah, those are the demands at University of Chicago, trying to get more transparency out of the university, and get them to acknowledge what's been going on in Gaza, and denounce it essentially. So yeah, divest, disclose, and repair are kind of the recurring themes that you hear at the U Chicago encampment.
Obviously, we're going to continue to follow this moving forward. It doesn't look like these protests are going to end anytime soon. And as we get closer and closer to DNC, it has a good feeling this will be a summer of protests, as Chicago is very familiar with. Every single week, we want to look at the stories that are not just on the headlines or the front pages, but stories that maybe people glossed over or are not as familiar with. Lee, I have to start with you. There has been a story out for a while now that's asking, did former candidate for governor Darren Bailey collude with a super PAC? What's going on here? Because I'm not going to lie, eyes glazed over this little one, even from me.
Okay, well, let me take you back a little bit to super PACs, right? Okay, we all remember Citizens United, right? Or maybe we don't. But basically, what a super PAC is, it's called an independent expenditure group. And these are groups that are allowed to raise an unlimited amount of money in a campaign as long as they don't coordinate with the campaign or with the candidate. So, for example, Jacoby, let's say you are running for governor of Illinois and I want to support you. And maybe Max is running against you and I want to run ads against him. So I could set up a super PAC called Illinois for Jacoby, and I could create a bunch of ads that are talking about how great your ideas are, or I could make a bunch of attack ads against Max. And I'm allowed to spend as much money as I want on that, as long as I don't call you up, Jacoby, and say, hey, what kind of things do you want us to talk about in these ads? So that's kind of, the basics of this coordination, right?
So we can't talk on the phone.
Nope.
We can't text, no emails. What if we in the coffee shop at the same time and you sitting like a table over and I'm sitting with my back to you in a newspaper and you're just being like, man, I wonder what the gubernatorial candidate wants, if they want attack ads, if they want things lauding their benefits, and you just sitting there and you go, well, attack their ass. That's what I would do. But we're not really talking to each other. Like, is that okay or no?
Well, you know what? This is where election law gets really murky, right? Because, to be honest, I'm not sure if I ran into you in the coffee shop, Jacoby, and we were just talking about, the Chicago Blackhawks or something. I don't really think that counts as like any kind of coordination because we're not talking about the campaign. But there are so many ways to get around these election laws, right? And especially when it comes to super PACs. So for example, if you were a candidate and you went on CityCast and you started talking about how you think crime in Chicago is really bad, I could then take those quotes and slap them up on a super PAC ad, and that would be totally fine because you said it in a public forum, and candidates do this all the time. They say something in a newspaper and then it goes in the super PAC ad. Or if you had a bunch of, say, B-roll on your campaign website, I could go ahead and use that because it would be in, it's fair use, it's public use. And that's not exactly coordinating, but it is using a lot of the things that you said.
I'm not going to talk to you directly, but I'll just sort of shout these things out. And if you got ears or some other auditory device to pick up these wavelengths I'm putting out, maybe you take them and say, that's what I should use to move forward.
Right, exactly. So what's happening with Darren Bailey, who was the former GOP nominee for governor in 2022, and Dan Proft, who is a right-wing radio host and also the founder of the super PAC called People Who Play by the Rules PAC, which Funny name considering what we're going to get into here.
That's a finger wagging name right there, Brody.
So the day after the Illinois primary in 2022, Dan Proft summons Darren Bailey and Bailey's campaign manager, Jose Durbin, and this is where it gets really on the nose Chicago politics, the back room of a Chicago area country club. And there's nobody else in this back room except Bailey, Durbin, Proft, and the waitress who takes their orders, according to the testimony that we heard on Monday. And during this meeting, Dan Proft slides over an envelope that he says contains $20 million from conservative mega donor Dick Uihlein. And basically what he says is, Darren Bailey, I think your campaign is awful right now. He actually calls Jose Durbin a, quote, effing moron. And he says, you need to hire me as your campaign manager, fire your staff, and you'll get all this money. And if you don't do that, then what we can do is establish the super PAC. So Bailey refuses to hire him. And so that's where we get to the situation where, okay, now we've established there's a super PAC. And we've established also that Darren Bailey and Dan Proft really don't like each other. So I don't think they're going to have a nice conversation in the coffee shop, right? And the question becomes, how do you get the message of the super PAC on the same page as the message of the Bailey campaign? And that is where Darren Bailey goes on Dan Proft's radio show, sits directly across from him, talks about how bad crime is in Chicago, and then those same themes become the dominant theme of the super PAC ads. And so that is really the core of the allegation here from Democratic Party of Illinois Executive Director Ben Hardin, who's the one that filed the complaint against this. And they're saying, you know, that is an example of coordination. And the other issue here is, even though federal election law pretty much enumerates what is and isn't coordination when it comes to super PACs, there's not a lot on the books on Illinois election law here that defines it. And so that has given Proft and Bailey's lawyers a little bit of ammunition to say, hey, you guys are hauling us in here and there are no rules exactly. Mm-hmm. You are using this case to establish these rules. You shouldn't do that.
You would think backroom, like when you add that modifier in, backroom conversations, and like I feel like the last few, and I'm not trying to say this is on the same scale, but the last few Illinois corruption trials, for example, right? When we talk ComEd, when we talk
Ed
Burke, forthcoming with Madigan, so much of this is asking the question, all right, folks are not just out here being like, hey, you want to do some collusion? Right? You want to do some racketeering? Let's get it in, baby. I'm trying to be corrupt. That's not what's happening. And so the Chicago way, as much as it feels like you know it when you see it, it also becomes this, I don't know if amorphous is the word, but it's something that it's allowed to be shifty and a little bit slimy, because the people we're working with and talking about and dealing with have some sense that the rules are very open-ended and flexible, allowing themselves, you know, a little bit of wiggle room when they are now sitting in front of, investigators.
But I think to that point, even, even when I think about the Burke trial, which I covered, the phrases like, did we land the tuna yet? There are even probably ways, and I saw the lawyers argue this, where, that's not really evidence of anything. But this just seems so clear, to the point that when I spoke with Illinois election lawyers about this before the hearing, one of them told me that there are so many ways to get around, super PAC laws, which are already, as you said, pretty amorphous. And they didn't do any of those. And this election lawyer said, it seems to me they were just being very stupid. So, unlike the Burke trial, where there's a little bit more finesse that I saw.
There's none here. There's none.
There really isn't. And so that is what we will find out in June or July. The hearing officer is going to make a decision on this. And it will be really interesting, because I think if there's no further clarification here, then that'll basically be a signal to anyone in Illinois that basically they can kind of do whatever they want with super PACs. But on the other hand, if they do say that this was collusion, I wonder if then we'll see some sort of ordinance on the books or see some official guidance coming from the Board of Elections that will enumerate things in the way that federal election law has done.
To the next one, Max. I just got back from Jazz Fest in New Orleans, so I've been in a very big sort of music, jazz, blues mood. And so your story about an iconic bar reopening in Greater Grand Crossing piqued my interest. Please tell me more.
Yeah, so Lee's Unleaded Blues actually had its soft opening this past weekend. I was in attendance. They got three-time Grammy nominee John Primer, absolutely tore it up. He even played one of my favorite songs of all time, which is Nothing Takes the Place of You. Isaac Hayes did a cover of that. I know a lot of other people have, but I said that if I'd had a few more drinks in me, I probably would have started crying because that's one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard. But that's beside the point. We're here to talk about Lee's Unleaded Blues. They were kind of known as the underground of the underground for Southside blues, dating back as far as like the late 60s, early 70s when they were known as Queen Bees. Whereas like Buddy Guy's Legends and others of that nature have kind of been known in more recent years for getting big names out there. Lee's was kind of where you would go for the quote unquote authentic taste of Southside blues. And so when they closed almost a decade ago, it was really taken as a loss to the community. It was taken as like a real institution that its future was a little murky at that point. But a few years later, Warren Berger, who owns Club Escape, a very famous and historic Black gay bar on the South Side, he took that over apparently at the behest of Leslie Hairston, who's the Fifth Ward alderperson at the time. And yeah, since then, they've been on a few years journey to renovate the place, obviously navigate COVID and all the impacts of that on venues and businesses. And yeah, this weekend was kind of the culmination of that, bringing together a very, very famous guitarist. I mean, this was Muddy Waters' last guitarist before he died. And so this is a real legend that they got to come and reopen the space. It's very exciting to see, like, will they kind of continue in that like underground, like focusing on just like who lives in the neighborhood, like drawing that kind of crowd, or if they'll focus on expanding to Chicago wide and really being kind of an establishment on the grounds of like Buddy Guy's Legends and Kingston Mines, things of that nature. So yeah, it's just a real exciting time to see what Lee's Unleaded's future holds.
I mean, can you talk a little bit more about how important this is for the South Side? Because when I have conversations about sort of the cultural institutions of the past that uplifted parts of South Shore, Chatham, Gresham, Bronzeville, the low end, so many of these institutions, we can't even go back to the building, see it's repurposed, like see it being repurposed and go, oh, that used to be. So many of these things have just been wiped out. So to see, even in the last few years, you know, Muddy Waters' granddaughter trying to take his former home, make it a museum, to see, you know, this club be able to reopen in its space. Like, what does it mean for the buildings, the remains that are still here to be having this second life?
I mean, I think I can use myself as like representative of that. I'd never heard of Lee's Unleaded. I've lived in Chicago only 5 years. I'm not from here. I had no idea this was a thing. Like, I didn't know that it would draw, that they'd be able to pull like this famous of an artist to do their reopening. Like, none of that history existed in my mind until I heard about the reopening, until I was able to write about this and get to learn the backstory. Like, if that building is demolished, if nobody cared about the institution or nobody had the resources to restore this institution in the way that it is, how many other people would be in that same position of like Lee's Unleaded? Once the people that went, once the regulars die off, like that's just the end. Nobody remembers it. And I think like the ability to go back in there, it's completely redone. Like there used to be a really cool tin ceiling that got taken out because it was damaged. There's not a whole lot of like relics from the original institution, but just the simple fact that it exists, that people are trying to honor that history, that they had such a beautiful kickoff to it with such a famed artist. Like now I know a little bit more about what the Southside's blues scene is all about, what it was all about, how it's influenced. I mean, there's a famous picture and recording of Muddy Waters and the Rolling Stones recording together. You could say that the Rolling Stones don't exist without Southside and Westside and Chicago blues. Like, it's really a beautiful thing to see just this one marker of Chicago's importance on the global stage. And yeah, getting to be in that energy and in that environment was really special.
Beautiful. I got to give a huge thank you already to our guest, Lee John Greco from Crane Chicago Business, Maxwell Evans from Block Club Chicago. But before I let y'all go, I got to make sure we do the same thing we do with every single episode, and that's give CityCast listeners something positive to move off the mic with, and that's some good news. Come on, Max always got my back, G, every single time. Lee, what about you? I know you got a cousin's wedding coming up you're really excited for. What's something else that's happening right now that's bringing you a lot of joy? What's your good news?
Yeah, I think like I said earlier, honestly, just the weather, like I'm back on my bike.
Come on.
I'm doing, there's a Femmes and Thems ride this coming weekend, and I've never done those.
According to Instagram, a safe space for women, femme, non-binary, and trans Chicagoans to ride bikes together. And the ride you mentioned this Saturday is their first birthday party. And it looks like they're riding from Green City Market in Lincoln Park to Ping Tom Memorial Park in Chinatown. It's about a 10-mile ride, but it's a fantastic group. We have put on so many different biking groups around Chicago, reading and running groups around Chicago. And so this is another one we are happy to share with the CityCast Chicago listeners. Femmes and Thems Bike Chicago. Check the link in the show notes to learn more. Max, I'm kicking it back over to you. What is your good news?
Well, you see, I'm actually a hater, so my good news is bad news for a lot of people, but I can't stand Drake, could not stand Drake since about 2014. And so the Kendrick Lamar diss track, Euphoria, like just beautiful, pure to my soul, joy. I feel like the world is finally coming around to what I've been saying for 10 years. I'm a Scorpio, so Drake makes Scorpios look bad. I'm a Toronto Raptors fan. He makes Toronto Raptors fans look bad. Wow. Everything that I love.
You are adding your own scathing bars to an already 6-minute track.
And it is such good, beautiful springtime news to just see the world turn against him in ways that I've been calling for literally a decade. So yeah, my good news is celebrating people's downfalls, being the villain, like that. Yeah, that's my good news.
No, I love that. As soon as it dropped on Tuesday, which was my birthday, so it felt like a birthday gift at 8:24 in the morning LA time. I felt like this was handed right to me, but I love, for as much as we can go through the double, triple, quadruple, quintuple entendre, I appreciated the parts when it was just sort of straight and point. It's like, this ain't been about critics, not about gimmicks, not about who the greatest. It's always been about love and hate. Now, let me say, I'm the biggest hater. I hate the way that you walk, the way that you talk. I hate the way that you dress. And I hate you for some very basic reasons, but I also hate you for some very deeply personal and vindictive reasons. Like, I loved it. I love the whole thing. I have no skin in the game. I was down for just two people to say wild things to each other. I'm excited to see where this goes next, but I don't think it's enough to tell a person that they are short, have a non-advantageous contract, and they have a small shoe size. I don't know if that's going to cut it moving forward. Before we get out of here, I'm going to end us off with my own good news. And I've sort of mentioned it a few times over the last couple of months, but it's the opening of Call and Response Books in my former neighborhood of Hyde Park. Shout out to owner Courtney Bledsoe, who has been working to open not only a bookstore, right? We were just celebrating Independent Bookstore Day, and Chicago is known across so many neighborhoods for just how much we support our local bookstores, how much we invest in them. And I'm excited to see a new bookstore come into a neighborhood that already has some fantastic places and options to buy books, to check books out at the library. And so just to see another bookstore being added to the ecosystem is amazing. And as I've mentioned before, I'm hosting an event there in a couple of weeks with our good friend Ariane Nettles in celebration of her book, We Are the Culture. But again, I just wanted to give another shout out to Courtney Bledsoe to have her dream being realized. And finally, for the store's grand opening to be this Saturday. I'm just very excited for them. I'm excited to give them some of my money. As all of my friends know, I'm going to spend the money on books. All of the stories we have talked about today, the best place to learn more is to head into our show notes. I have to give another huge thank you to our guest today from Block Club Chicago, Maxwell Evans. Thank you for making time for us, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and I'm sure I'll be back.
Yes, sir. And from Crane Chicago, Lee John Greco. I can't wait to have you back for a Friday news roundup, to watch another Chicago classic, whatever it is. I appreciate you making time.
Thanks, Jacoby.
One more thing, I gotta give a huge thank you to all the people who make CityCast Chicago possible. Our executive producer is Simone Alicea. Our producer is Michelle Navarro. Our newsletter editor is Sydney Madden. We had additional help from roving editor Adrian Gonzalez. The music we all love is from All the Kimonos, Mark Greenberg from the Mayfair Workshop, and of course the homie Sam Thousand. And my last thank you, as it is every episode and every week, is for you, the people who listen to CityCast Chicago, who read Hey Chicago, who put us on with their friends and their family, who leave us a review wherever they listen to the podcast, and also give us that 5-star rating. And of course, the people who gonna be back here bright and early on Monday, y'all are my most favorite. I know I'm not supposed to have favorites, but I do. I'm gonna talk to y'all then. Peace.